And welcome back here to Open. October is National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And according to the U.S. Department of Justice, an estimated 1.3 million women and 835,000 men are abused by their partners every year. Cases of domestic violence became more prevalent during the coronavirus pandemic, and many individuals are unaware of what their next steps are and what they actually need to do to ensure protection. Joining us now in this segment to tell us a little bit more is the owner of the Marnell Law Group, Russell Marnell, and he'll share a little bit with us about domestic violence and domestic violence awareness. And Russell, good to have you with us.
It's great to be here, Darren. Thank you.
Thank you. And listen, we talk about October being Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Obviously, domestic violence is something that goes on every month, every day across America. But talk to us about your experience with the COVID-19 pandemic. What are we seeing by way of numbers? Are we seeing more cases being reported? Because from some domestic violence advocates, they feel as though a whole lot is also still silent.
I think both. I think there are more cases being reported, but at the same time, there are more cases also that are not being reported because of the circumstances that exist with COVID. And what I mean by that is that besides the fact that the victim of domestic violence is still residing with their partner or spouse during COVID, there are more reasons because of COVID that make it more difficult for a victim to leave the residence that they might be with the abuser. And I say that because COVID certainly has significantly and negatively impacted financially on many couples and their relationships, making it more difficult for them to access the financial resources to leave. And also just COVID itself, concerns about catching the virus might have in some ways influenced victims to remain in the house where if they understand that it's a COVID-free environment, they might be more reluctant to move to another location.
Talk to me about domestic violence. When we talk about it as a whole, many people often go to the physical form of domestic violence, and they've equated domestic violence with being something that's just physical. But from a legal perspective, I know that, and I know that, domestic violence extends into several other areas. But for someone who may not be so familiar with domestic violence, what would entail domestic violence from a legal perspective?
Well, certainly physical violence, as you indicated, often is one form of, and a common form of domestic violence, but it could also be emotional and psychological abuse. It could be violence towards property that has a significant impact on the victim. But oftentimes the psychological abuse can be just as damaging, if not more so, than the physical abuse. And psychological abuse is constantly cursing at their spouse or paramour, threatening to do certain things to their paramour, whether it be physical in terms of violence or emotional or even monetary. All those types of threats can have significant emotional and psychological ramifications. But from a legal point of view, threats and cursing and items along or conduct consistent with that would be for the cursing part, no legitimate purpose, things like that would be a basis of or type of domestic violence that doesn't involve some type of physical confrontation.
Mm-hmm. And what advice do you give to people right now who may be actually struggling dealing with this issue from a perspective of when does it become a legal matter that I should seek an attorney?
Well, I guess it depends on the threshold of tolerance that the victim has, as well as the legalities of it certainly come into play too. They wouldn't know necessarily the legalities of it, so that's why I said the threshold of tolerance. Once it becomes the victim contacts, let's say, the Coalition on Domestic Violence and the police, that's probably the time that certainly to reach out and obtain a lawyer who's involved in the field of the matrimonial and family law, so they can give guidance as to what the appropriate legal remedies would be in terms of orders of protection in the context of family court. If it escalates to a criminal matter in addition to that, then there could be orders of protection in the criminal matter also. Now, you don't necessarily need an attorney to represent the victim in a criminal matter, because the district attorney or assistant district attorney who works for the state would essentially be akin to the attorney for the victim, although technically they're not the attorney, but they represent the people of the state, and the victim is the complainant. So they don't need the complainant or the victim doesn't need a separate attorney. Obviously, the perpetrator of the crime would obviously need a criminal attorney of some type. In the context of family court, the victim probably should have an attorney. And the end game of a family court would be a order of protection, which would require at minimum, usually the respondent, the person who perpetuated the domestic violence, to refrain from assault, menacing, harassment, or any of the underlying, whatever the underlying allegations are on the petition that would give rise to the final order of protection. When there's abuse, significant abuse, especially physical abuse, there's often a stay away provision in the order of protection, which requires the perpetrator to stay away from the victim, both where the victim works, where the victim lives, or in any public place where the perpetrator may encounter the victim. So,
and when you talk about that stay away order, most of the time people think about a man with a woman. Usually the man is the one that receives the stay away order. From talking to people on the legal front, we're finding out more and more now that women are actually receiving more and more stay away orders as well. True?
Yes, there are certainly a greater percentage of men who are now willing to petition a family court to get an order of protection than perhaps in the past, due to embarrassment or perceived humiliation, and that a woman assaulted them or beat them up or hit them or possibly even used a weapon against them. Now they're standing up for their rights also to live without having to be in constant fear of being assaulted or threatened by their female companion. So yes, more and more men are now seeking orders of protection also.
Russ, we're gonna have to leave it there, but for people who want more information, what can they do in a time such as this?
Contact the local coalition of domestic violence in the vicinity of where they live. Certainly, if it's an emergency, contact the police, dial 911 to get intervention. And if it's not an emergency, they should contact a competent matrimonial or family law attorney to assist them through the process.
Yeah. Russell Marnell, thank you so much for being with us and sharing with us. I think a lot of information has been given that people can take a look and see, as we're talking about National Domestic Violence Awareness Month, that the services as well as the challenges of this present time. Thanks a lot, Russell.
Thank you, Darren. Have a wonderful day.
All righty, Russell Marnell, our guest here on Open. We want you to stay with us. Guess what? We've got more show coming up. Don't go anywhere. Open will return right after this.